On February 14, 1938, a single phone call to the New York Telephone Company would expose the first major Nazi espionage network operating on American soil. The caller claimed to be a high-ranking State Department official requesting blank passport forms that could be used to create false identities for German intelligence agents operating around the world. But a telephone operator at the switching center found the request unusual and consulted her supervisor. Protocol dictated that government officials requesting sensitive documents typically went through formal channels rather than making direct telephone calls. When the operator called the State Department's actual New York office and asked to speak with Undersecretary of State George S. Messersmith, she was informed that no such request had been made and that Messersmith was not even in New York that day. He was in Washington, D.C. The State Department official immediately recognized the call as a potential security breach and contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The man who made that telephone call was Guenther Gustav Maria Rumrich, a 27-year-old former U.S. Army deserter working as a poorly paid clerk in New York City while simultaneously serving as an intelligence agent for the Abwehr, Nazi Germany's military intelligence service. His clumsy attempt to steal government documents would lead to the first major prosecution of foreign spies in American history and reveal to the public the extent to which Nazi Germany was actively gathering intelligence on U.S. military capabilities in the years before World War II. Before we follow Guenther Rumrich's path from Army deserter to Nazi spy, if you're interested in the hidden operations of World War II intelligence and the real human cost of espionage, subscribe and turn on notifications. We bring you documented Cold War and World War II cases every week, uncovering the truth behind history's most consequential secrets. Guenther Gustav Maria Rumrich was born on November 6, 1911, in Chicago, Illinois, to parents who had immigrated from Austria-Hungary. His father worked as a machinist in Chicago's industrial district, while his mother took in work to supplement the family's income. According to school records, Guenther was an intelligent but restless child who showed little interest in academics. He spoke German at home and English in school, moving fluently between both languages. In 1929, at age 18, Rumrich enlisted in the U.S. Army and was assigned to the 18th Infantry Regiment at Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn, New York. According to his military service record, his performance for the first 5 years was unremarkable. Adequate execution of duties, no commendations, no major disciplinary actions, but in 1934, his military career began to deteriorate. He went AWOL twice that year, receiving a demotion and eventually a 6-month confinement after a court-martial for desertion. On October 27, 1935, Rumrich deserted from the Army entirely, walking away from Fort Hamilton during a work assignment and never returning. The Army issued a warrant. But finding one deserter among millions in New York City proved impossible. He found work as a clerk and occasional translator in Manhattan's Yorkville neighborhood, where he could blend into the large German immigrant community. He had little money, no prospects, and increasing resentment about his failures. According to Rumrich's later testimony to FBI investigators, sometime in late 1935 or early 1936, he made contact with German intelligence by writing a letter to a German military official expressing his willingness to provide information about the U.S. Army. The letter reached the Abwehr, which recognized Rumrich as a potential asset. Someone with recent U.S. military experience, language skills, and apparent willingness to betray his former country. The Abwehr, established in 1920 as Germany's military intelligence service, had expanded significantly under Nazi rule. By the late 1930s, it operated networks in dozens of countries, collecting military, political, and economic intelligence. Its operations in the United States focused primarily on gathering information about American military capabilities, industrial production capacity, and political sentiment regarding potential U.S. intervention in European conflicts. Rumrich's handlers, German intelligence officers operating under cover at the German consulate in New York and aboard German ships docking at New York Harbor, gave him assignments that were specific but often poorly conceived. He was instructed to obtain information about military installations, to collect blank passport forms that could be used to create false identities, to gather data on ship movements and harbor defenses, and to recruit other potential agents. Blank passport forms were particularly valuable to intelligence services because they could be used to create authentic-appearing travel documents for agents operating internationally. Unlike forged passports, which might be detected through examination of paper quality, printing techniques, or security features, documents created from stolen genuine forms could pass most inspections. Such documents would allow German agents to travel internationally using false American identities, providing both cover and the prestige and access that American citizenship afforded in many countries during this period. According to FBI records compiled after Rumrich's arrest, he had been active as a German agent for approximately 2 years. During that time, he provided his handlers with relatively low-level information. Observations about military procedures from his Army service, publicly available information about ship schedules, sketches of military installations observable from public locations. He attempted to recruit at least 3 other individuals to work for German intelligence with unclear success. According to FBI financial analysis and Rumrich's testimony, he received payments ranging from $20 to $50 per assignment, modest sums, even by 1930s standards. For context, the average weekly wage for an American worker in 1938 was approximately $25, meaning Rumrich's espionage earnings supplemented but did not replace his legitimate income. Over approximately 2 years of espionage activity, FBI investigators estimated Rumrich had received a total of less than $1,000 from his German handlers, a sum that contrasted sharply with the decades-long consequences he would face. These payments provided extra income and, perhaps more importantly, a sense of purpose and importance that his work as a clerk did not provide. The assignment that led to his downfall came from his Abwehr handler in early February 1938. According to Rumrich's testimony, his handler needed blank U.S. passport forms to create false identification documents for agents operating in other countries. The forms needed to be official and authentic, not forgeries, which meant they had to be stolen from U.S. government sources. Rumrich's plan was remarkably unsophisticated. He decided to simply call and request them while impersonating a government official. Apparently believing that the prestige of the Undersecretary of State's title would overcome any questions about the irregularity of the request. When the operator's verification call to the State Department revealed the fraud, the State Department official immediately contacted the FBI's New York field office. The FBI assigned the case to Special Agent Leon Turrou, a 43-year-old investigator who had been with the Bureau since 1929. Turrou had been born in Russia, had come to the United States as a child, spoke multiple languages including German and Russian, and had developed expertise in espionage cases involving foreign intelligence services. Turrou's first step was working with the telephone company to trace the call. In 1938, telephone technology still required operators to manually connect most calls, which meant records existed of call origins. The records showed that the call claiming to be from Undersecretary Messersmith had been placed from a pay telephone at a drugstore on East 86th Street in Manhattan's Yorkville neighborhood. Rather than trying to identify the caller directly through drugstore employees who couldn't remember one customer among dozens, Turrou decided to set a trap. He arranged with the State Department to have a clerk call the number Rumrich had provided and leave a message stating that the passport forms he had requested were ready for pickup at the State Department's New York office. On February 18, 1938, 4 days after the original telephone call, a man entered the State Department's New York office at 45 Broadway and approached the reception desk, stating he was there to collect passport forms prepared for Undersecretary Messersmith. The receptionist, who had been briefed by the FBI, signaled to agents positioned in an adjacent office. The man was Guenther Rumrich. According to the FBI arrest report, when agents approached and identified themselves, Rumrich initially attempted to deny any knowledge of the passport request. He claimed he had come to the State Department office to inquire about travel documents for a friend. When asked to identify himself, he gave a false name, Edward Weston. Agents arrested Rumrich and transported him to the FBI's New York field office. His fingerprints matched Army records identifying him as Guenther Gustav Maria Rumrich, private deserter, wanted since October 1935. Faced with this identification and the evidence of his attempted passport theft, Rumrich's resistance began to collapse. The interrogation of Guenther Rumrich, conducted over 3 days from February 18th through February 20th, 1938, proved to be the breakthrough the FBI needed. According to FBI interrogation logs, Rumrich initially attempted to maintain his cover story, but eventually made a decision that would have profound consequences for the German intelligence network operating in the United States. He began to cooperate. His cooperation appeared motivated by multiple factors. He faced serious federal charges impersonating a government official, attempted theft of government property, and desertion from the Army that could result in decades in prison. He seemed to recognize that his espionage career had been brief and ultimately pointless, and he appeared to hope that cooperation might result in lenient treatment. His decision to cooperate provided FBI agents with the operational details they needed to dismantle the network. The identities of other agents, the locations where meetings occurred, the methods used for communication and dead drops, and, most importantly, the names of the German intelligence officers serving as handlers. Rumrich identified Dr. Ignatz Griebl as a senior coordinator who recruited agents and managed multiple operations. He named Johanna Hofmann as a courier who carried messages between agents and handlers. He identified Erich Glaser, a draftsman at Seversky Aircraft Corporation, who had been providing technical drawings of military aircraft components. He named several others, some minor participants, some more significant than Rumrich had realized. The information Rumrich provided allowed the FBI to move quickly. Within 7 days of his arrest, FBI agents had placed the other suspects under surveillance, documented their movements, and begun gathering evidence for arrests. Based on Rumrich's information, the FBI began a coordinated investigation involving surveillance, additional interrogations, and collection of documentary evidence. On February 25, 1938, FBI agents arrested Dr. Ignatz Griebl at his medical office on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. According to the arrest report, Griebl appeared shocked when agents entered his office and informed him he was under arrest for espionage. He was placed in handcuffs and taken into custody. Griebel's interrogation revealed a more sophisticated operation than Rumrich had been part of. According to FBI records, Griebl had been working for German intelligence since 1934 approximately a year before Rumrich's recruitment. Griebel's motivations appeared primarily ideological rather than financial. He was an ardent supporter of the Nazi regime, believed in the superiority of German culture and governance, and saw his espionage work as service to the fatherland. He had used his position as a respected physician and his extensive social connections within New York's German-American community to identify potential recruits, gather information, and serve as a central coordinator for multiple agents. Griebl initially refused to cooperate, asserting his loyalty to Germany and declining to answer questions. However, when confronted with evidence that other network members were in custody and providing information, and when his attorney advised him that his chances of acquittal were minimal, Griebl began to provide limited cooperation, confirming much of what Rumrich had already told investigators. Over the following weeks, the FBI arrested additional network members. Johanna Hofmann was arrested at her Yorkville apartment on March 2, 1938. According to the arrest report, she was found with letters and documents containing coded messages and instructions for other agents. Erich Glaser was arrested at his workplace on March 8th. A search of his home produced technical drawings he had removed from his employer's offices, drawings of aircraft components, engine specifications, and other sensitive technical information. The arrests continued beyond the initial core group. William Lonkowski, a naturalized U.S. citizen who worked as a hairdresser, was arrested on March 10th. According to FBI records, Lonkowski had served as a courier and recruiter, using his beauty salon as a meeting place where agents could pass information without arousing suspicion. His arrest revealed that the network had been larger and more extensively organized than initial investigations had suggested, with multiple cells operating independently but coordinating through handlers like Griebl. The investigation expanded beyond New York. FBI field offices in other cities identified and arrested individuals connected to the network. In total, 18 people were arrested and charged with espionage-related offenses in what became known as the Rumrich spy case. The individuals arrested represented a cross-section of German immigrants and German Americans. Some were recent immigrants who maintained strong ties to Germany. Others were naturalized citizens or American-born individuals of German descent, recruited based on ethnic loyalty or ideological sympathy with Nazism. The techniques Rumrich and others employed were standard espionage tradecraft. A brush pass involved two individuals making brief, seemingly accidental contact, during which materials could be exchanged. A folded newspaper handed over during a momentary conversation, a package transferred while one person helped another with dropped items. Dead drops involved leaving materials in predetermined locations, beneath park benches, behind loose bricks, in hollowed-out tree trunks, where they could be retrieved later by another operative, eliminating the need for direct contact between agent and handler. FBI records documented the network's activities over approximately 2 years. The Ring had collected information on U.S. military installations along the East Coast, including detailed observations of fortifications at Fort Totten and Fort Hamilton. They had monitored ship movements at Brooklyn Navy Yard, photographing vessels and recording departure schedules. Technical drawings of aircraft components had been stolen from defense contractors and passed to German handlers through dead drops and personal meetings aboard German ships docked in New York Harbor. The network operated using standard espionage tradecraft of the era. Agents received assignments from handlers during brief meetings in public locations, restaurants, parks, or aboard German vessels. They passed information through dead drops, leaving packages or documents in predetermined locations for retrieval by other agents or handlers. Payments were delivered in cash, typically in amounts between $20 and $50 per assignment, though some agents, like Dr. Griebl, appeared motivated more by ideological commitment to Nazism than by financial compensation. The evidence collected revealed an espionage operation that, while ultimately amateurish and limited in its actual accomplishments, represented a systematic effort by Nazi Germany to collect intelligence on American military capabilities, industrial production, and political developments. The federal government's decision to prosecute the case publicly, rather than handling it quietly through diplomatic channels, reflected both the Roosevelt administration's growing concern about Nazi Germany's activities in the United States and a calculated political strategy to alert the American public to the reality of foreign espionage operations on U.S. soil. In the spring of 1938, as Nazi Germany annexed Austria and threatened Czechoslovakia, American public opinion remained deeply divided about European conflicts. The exposure of a Nazi spy ring operating in New York provided concrete evidence of German intentions and activities that went beyond European borders. Of the 18 individuals initially identified by the FBI, 4 fled the country before they could be arrested. These included 2 senior Abwehr officers who had been operating under diplomatic cover at the German consulate in New York. Their diplomatic status had provided them with immunity from arrest, but it also meant they were being watched closely by FBI surveillance teams. When arrests of lower-level network members became public, these handlers recognized the danger and departed for Germany immediately, using their diplomatic credentials to avoid detention. 2 additional agents, lower-level operatives who had been warned by Confederates not yet in custody, also fled to Germany, boarding ships before arrest warrants could be executed. The trial of the Rumrich spy ring defendants began on October 24, 1938, in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. The presiding judge was John C. Knox, a 58-year-old jurist appointed to the federal bench in 1933, who had a reputation for running an efficient courtroom and taking a hard line on cases involving threats to national security. Federal prosecutors presented the government's case methodically, building on evidence collected during the FBI investigation. The prosecution's strategy was to demonstrate through documentary evidence, testimony from FBI agents, and admissions from the defendants that a coordinated espionage network had been operating with the knowledge and direction of German intelligence services, that members had collected and transmitted sensitive information, and that this activity constituted a clear violation of federal espionage laws. The 14 defendants who remained fell into several categories. Guenther Rumrich and several others pleaded guilty, hoping that cooperation and acceptance of responsibility would result in reduced sentences. Dr. Ignatz Griebl, after initially resisting cooperation, eventually pleaded guilty as well, though he provided minimal additional information. A few defendants maintained their innocence and went to trial, arguing they had been entrapped, their activities had been mischaracterized, or they had not understood that what they were doing constituted espionage. The evidence presented at trial painted a detailed picture of how the espionage network had operated. FBI agents testified about surveillance operations, dead drops, coded communications, and meetings between agents and handlers. Documents seized during searches were entered into evidence, letters written in code, technical drawings of military equipment, photographs of military installations, financial records showing payments from German sources. Several defendants who had pleaded guilty and were cooperating testified about their recruitment, training, assignments, and interactions with German intelligence officers. One of the most dramatic moments in the trial came when Erich Glaser testified about his work, stealing technical drawings from his employer, the Seversky Aircraft Corporation. Glaser, who had agreed to cooperate in exchange for a recommendation of leniency, described in detail how he had systematically photographed or copied drawings of aircraft components over approximately 2 years. Under cross-examination by defense attorneys, Glaser was asked whether he had ever considered that the information he provided might be used to develop weapons that could eventually be used against the United States. According to trial transcripts, Glaser appeared shaken by the question and admitted he had avoided confronting the implications of his actions, convincing himself the information wouldn't be used against the United States. The trial concluded on November 18, 1938. After 3 weeks of proceedings, the jury deliberated for approximately 7 hours before returning guilty verdicts for all defendants who had gone to trial. Those who had pleaded guilty awaited sentencing. The Rumrich trial established several important legal precedents that would shape future espionage prosecutions. The court ruled that peacetime espionage could be prosecuted with substantial penalties even in the absence of a declared war. The case established that providing classified military information to a foreign power constituted a violation of federal law, regardless of whether that foreign power was officially designated as hostile. The court also affirmed that cooperation with investigators could be considered a mitigating factor in sentencing, but did not eliminate culpability for the underlying crimes. These precedents would prove crucial in subsequent years. As the United States moved closer to involvement in World War II, the legal framework established by the Rumrich case provided prosecutors with clear authority to pursue espionage cases aggressively, and it established sentencing guidelines that balanced punishment with incentives for cooperation. Judge Knox's sentencing decisions, delivered on December 2, 1938, reflected both the seriousness with which the court viewed espionage and a recognition of varying degrees of culpability among the defendants. Guenther Rumrich, whose arrest had initiated the entire investigation and whose cooperation had been extensive, received a sentence of 2 years in federal prison, a relatively lenient sentence given the potential penalties for espionage. The court's leniency reflected Rumrich's cooperation, his relatively low level within the network, and the prosecution's recommendation based on his assistance. Dr. Ignatz Griebl received a more severe sentence, 6 years in federal prison, reflecting his more senior role in the network, his initial refusal to cooperate, and the judge's assessment that Griebl's ideological commitment to Nazism made him a more dangerous figure than Rumrich. Erich Glaser received 4 years, a sentence that balanced his cooperation against the significant damage he had caused by providing detailed technical information about military aircraft. Johanna Hofmann received 3 years. Other defendants received sentences ranging from 18 months to 5 years, depending on their roles, their level of cooperation, and the specific charges against them. In his remarks at sentencing, Judge Knox emphasized that the defendants had violated the fundamental obligations of citizenship through their disloyalty and their disrespect for the nation's laws and security. He noted that while the United States was not at war with Germany, and while espionage in peacetime did not carry the same penalties as wartime espionage, the defendants' actions had nonetheless threatened national security and had served the interests of a foreign power that was increasingly hostile to democratic values and international peace. The public reaction to the trial and the revelations about Nazi espionage was extensive and overwhelmingly approving of the FBI's work. The New York Times provided front-page coverage throughout the trial, with headlines emphasizing the threat posed by foreign espionage networks. Editorial pages across the country praised the convictions and called for increased vigilance against Nazi intelligence operations. The case had particular resonance because it occurred during a period when American public opinion about Nazi Germany was rapidly evolving. The annexation of Austria in March 1938 and the increasing pressure on Czechoslovakia had begun to shift public sentiment away from isolationism and toward recognition of the Nazi threat. The Rumrich case provided concrete domestic evidence of German aggression, not abstract reports from Europe, but actual spies stealing actual American military secrets on American soil. Some commentators use the case to argue for stricter immigration controls and increased monitoring of German-American communities. Others emphasized the need for improved security procedures at defense contractors and military installations. The case became a touchstone in debates about American preparedness and the extent to which the United States should increase its counterintelligence capabilities in anticipation of potential conflict. The Rumrich case had several significant consequences beyond the specific convictions and sentences. The security vulnerabilities exposed by the case led to immediate and substantial reforms. The Department of Defense implemented enhanced background check procedures for all personnel with access to classified information. Defense contractors were required to establish security offices and to report any suspicious activities by employees. The FBI expanded its counterintelligence division, established dedicated German espionage investigation teams, and developed more sophisticated surveillance protocols for monitoring suspected foreign agents. Perhaps most significantly, the case led to improved coordination between the FBI, military intelligence agencies, and the State Department. Before the Rumrich case, these agencies had often operated independently with minimal information sharing. The success of the Rumrich investigation, which had required coordination between the FBI, the State Department, the telephone company, and military authorities, demonstrated the value of interagency cooperation. This collaborative approach would become standard practice in subsequent espionage investigations and would prove crucial during World War II when the scale and sophistication of foreign intelligence operations increased dramatically. The case also had a chilling effect on German intelligence operations in the United States, at least temporarily. The public exposure of the network and the arrest of multiple agents made it more difficult for German intelligence to operate with the same openness it had enjoyed previously. Potential recruits became more cautious, knowing that the FBI was actively investigating German espionage. Guenther Rumrich was incarcerated at the Federal Correctional Institution at Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. According to prison records, he was considered a model prisoner, working in the prison library, taking correspondence courses in bookkeeping and accounting, and avoiding disciplinary incidents. He was released in February 1941 after serving approximately 26 months, including time credited for good behavior. Upon his release, Rumrich faced a difficult situation. He was a convicted spy and army deserter in a country moving steadily toward war with Nazi Germany. His parents, horrified and ashamed by his conviction, had severed contact with him. His criminal record made employment difficult. The German-American neighborhoods where he had lived before his arrest now viewed him with suspicion and hostility, both because of his conviction and because his cooperation with the FBI had led to the arrest and imprisonment of others. According to limited records, Rumrich found low-wage work that did not require background checks and lived quietly in Brooklyn. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, Rumrich's situation became even more precarious. the FBI maintained surveillance on former German agents and suspected sympathizers. Concerned about potential sabotage or espionage activities, Rumrich was required to register as a former enemy agent and was subject to periodic questioning by FBI agents. There is no evidence that he ever re-engaged in espionage activities. Dr. Ignatz Griebl served his 6-year sentence and was released in 1944. According to immigration records, he was deported to Germany in 1946 under provisions that allowed for the deportation of aliens convicted of crimes involving moral turpitude. He returned to a Germany that had been devastated by 6 years of total war, divided into occupation zones controlled by the Allied powers, and confronting the moral reckoning of the Nazi regime's atrocities. Historical records provide little information about Griebel's life in post-war Germany, but given his age, he would have been 56 at the time of deportation, and the chaotic conditions in post-war Germany, it is unlikely he was able to resume his medical career or achieve any degree of prosperity. Erich Glaser served his 4-year sentence and was released in 1942. According to FBI records, he attempted to find work in technical fields but was largely unsuccessful due to his criminal record and security concerns his espionage conviction raised. Historical records indicate he died in the early 1960s. Johanna Hofmann served her 3-year sentence and was released in 1941. According to later accounts, she moved to a small town in upstate New York where her past was less well known and lived quietly. Historical records indicate she died in the late 1960s. The personal consequences for the families of convicted spies extended across generations. Court records and later historical research documented the experiences of children who grew up knowing their parents had been convicted of espionage. These children faced social stigma in their communities, struggled with questions of identity and loyalty, and often changed their names to escape association with their parents' crimes. Some children maintained relationships with their imprisoned parents, visiting them, and eventually accepting their parents' explanations for their actions. Others severed contact entirely, unable to reconcile their parents' espionage with their own sense of American identity. School records from the period show that children of convicted spies frequently experienced academic difficulties, social isolation, and in some cases, bullying from peers who learned about their parents' convictions. The wives of several convicted spies, women who had not been charged with any crimes and who, according to FBI investigations, had no knowledge of their husbands' espionage activities, faced their own difficulties. They struggled with financial hardship when their husbands' incomes disappeared. They faced suspicion from neighbors and communities despite having committed no crimes themselves. Several eventually divorced their imprisoned husbands and attempted to rebuild their lives, though the stigma of having been married to convicted spies followed them for years. The Rumrich spy case occupies a particular place in the history of American counterintelligence. It was the first major successful prosecution of a foreign espionage network in the United States, establishing precedents and procedures that would be used in subsequent cases throughout World War II and the Cold War. It demonstrated the FBI's capability to investigate and dismantle espionage operations through careful surveillance, coordination with other agencies, and effective use of cooperating witnesses. But the case also revealed something about the nature of espionage itself, particularly espionage conducted by individuals who are not professional intelligence officers, but are instead ordinary people recruited to betray their countries. The members of the Rumrich spy ring were not master spies or ideological fanatics. They were a physician who believed in German superiority, a draftsman who provided technical drawings, a hairdresser who served as a courier, a former soldier who wanted to feel important. They were people making choices that seemed reasonable or necessary or even noble at the time, but that proved to be profoundly destructive. The question of responsibility in cases like this involves multiple levels of analysis. At the individual level, each member of the spy ring made conscious choices to engage in espionage, to steal information, to deceive their colleagues and neighbors, to serve a foreign power. They bore responsibility for those choices and deserved to face legal consequences. At the systemic level, the case revealed vulnerabilities in American security procedures, inadequate background checks, limited monitoring of individuals with access to classified information, insufficient coordination between law enforcement agencies, reliance on administrative procedures that could be easily circumvented. At the ideological level, the case occurred in a context of rising Nazi power and influence, international tensions, and competing visions of political order. Some of the spies were motivated by genuine belief in Nazi ideology, others by ethnic loyalty to Germany, others by financial need or personal ambition. At the human level, the case involved individuals trying to navigate difficult circumstances, making choices based on incomplete information and imperfect understanding, experiencing consequences they had not fully anticipated. The suffering caused by the case extended far beyond the spies themselves to include their families, particularly their children, who bore no responsibility for their parents' choices, but who experienced shame, stigma, and lasting trauma. Espionage, at least at the level Rumrich and most of his co-conspirators operated, was not a dramatic adventure, but a mundane betrayal, carried out by ordinary people in ordinary circumstances for ordinary reasons: money, recognition, ideology, fear. The consequences were no less severe for being the result of mundane decisions rather than dramatic conspiracies. The Rumrich case demonstrated that espionage prosecutions could serve multiple purposes: legal punishment for specific crimes, deterrence of future espionage through public exposure of consequences, education of the American public about security threats, and political messaging about American resolve to defend national security. But the case also revealed the human costs that extended far beyond the courtroom. Families destroyed, children traumatized, lives permanently marked by decisions made during a brief period. Rumrich was 27 years old when he made the phone call that exposed the spy ring. His espionage activities had lasted perhaps 2 years. His legal consequences, arrest, trial, imprisonment, occupied approximately 4 years of his life. Historical records indicate he died in the mid-1970s, having spent the remaining decades living with the personal consequences: inability to find meaningful work, severed family relationships, social isolation, the permanent stigma of being a convicted spy. The telephone operator who answered Rumrich's call on February 14, 1938, could not have known that her decision to verify an unusual request would expose a major espionage network, lead to the conviction of 14 people, establish important legal precedents, and alter the lives of dozens of families. But her adherence to protocol, her recognition that something seemed wrong, and her decision to check rather than simply comply, demonstrated that national security sometimes depends on ordinary people doing ordinary jobs with extraordinary attention to detail. The Rumrich case remains a foundational moment in American counterintelligence history. The first time the United States successfully prosecuted a major foreign espionage network in peacetime, the first time the public confronted concrete evidence of Nazi intelligence operations on American soil, and the first test of legal and investigative procedures that would be refined and employed throughout World War II and the Cold War that followed. It revealed both the vulnerability of an open society to foreign intelligence operations and the capacity of that society, once alerted to the threat, to respond effectively through coordinated law enforcement action,